Hi, and thanks for tuning in to the CBA Podcast, a place where we chat about our own recent achievements in the area of electronics, software and mechanical engineering, and more likely than not, give excuses for not having done anything at all. Hello and welcome back to this episode. You may have noticed that I skipped the usual "this episode is about blah blah blah" intro, because this podcast doesn't really have a theme. It's all over the place, has a lot of little subjects, and an intro really doesn't make sense here, I think. By the way, this time I'm standing up while making a podcast, because usually when I stand up and speak for a long time, I get into breathing problems, and that is when I speak in front of a crowd or even when I speak alone when I'm standing up. So now I'm trying to train that a little bit and reproduce the problem in a controlled environment, and it seems to work, I think. Let's talk a little bit about feedback and comments about the previous episode. I have a reptile egg hatcher which I use as a heater to get moisture out of PCBs and components. Now, a friend of mine mentioned that at his workplace they have barrels filled with silica pellets to store PCBs in. And that's not so much to get moisture out of PCBs, he thought, but to prevent moisture from entering PCBs in the first place. Now, when he talked about that, I was thinking about fish and PCBs being stored in that barrel in the same time. But it's probably not like that in reality. Maybe worth mentioning is in the category of equipment that I sometimes use or often enough use, is a calibrator, which is a very accurate voltage or current source, and it's sized like a DMM, so it has batteries and you can hold it in your hand, and it's much more convenient as a lab supply. It doesn't go up to more than 10 volts, I think, and 24 milliamps or something like that, but most of the time that's all you need, because especially if you need a small current source, you can simply use that. And it works very well, very accurate, so I'm happy with that. And with respect to components without documentation, I was at a birthday party recently. There was a kid, who was a son of friends of mine, who was 30 years old and was into JavaScript programming. So I asked him what he did when he needed documentation, when he got stuck programming. And he told me that he would first search on YouTube for videos explaining how something worked, to actually show him literally how it worked, and then maybe on Google. I asked him, don't you use Google? Yeah, maybe sometimes when I can't find anything on YouTube. Now for me that's completely the opposite of what I do, because when I search for documentation, I think most people I know, they search with Google and they search for text files, basically, text and pictures. Now apparently there's a big age gap, so we search for videos and audio, but I guess whatever works. Yeah, the little sound fragment that you heard just now was an idea taken from the Player Missile podcast by Rob McMullen. The idea is to have a separation between different sections in the podcast, because maybe I ramble on a little bit and I jump between topics very quickly, and maybe that's a little bit confusing if you are not, in fact, me. Player Missile podcast is very nice, I think. It is basically about Atari home computers, and it's very in-depth technical, I think. Much more so than a lot of other podcasts, and I like that. And Rob McMullen said that he likes to make the podcast that he would listen to himself. He would like to hear. He makes what he would like to hear himself. So I think I'm trying to do that a little bit with this podcast. So I would like to sit in my car and listen to someone talk about his or her problems and issues and challenges and ideas with hobby stuff. So I'm hoping that makes sense, and I hope some other people like it for that reason as well. Of course, whatever you think, you can also send feedback to this podcast using the email address on the podcast.cba.si page. You can no longer send comments because you have to have a Facebook account for that, and I don't even have a Facebook account. I don't like Facebook that much. Now let's talk a little bit about what I did last couple of weeks since the last episode. First of all, I took apart a electrical toothbrush, and not even the electronics, but the little plastic dumb thing that you put on top of the toothbrush. So my question is, how do you go from rotation in, for example, the x-axis to rotation in the z-axis? And the mechanism was, of course, very simple, but I just needed to see that. It was very nice, very simple. You had two settings, like a high rotation amplitude and a low rotation amplitude, and I wondered how that worked, because it couldn't be expensive, because these things sell for €1 or something like that. But maybe my point is this. I used to be in communities, and even part of communities, that would ridicule people who would ask very noob questions. So if they were not familiar with some technology, the existing people in the group would make it very difficult for new people to ask questions and ridicule them and tell them they should read a manual and so on, to maybe hide their own ignorance or protect their own little group and their own little community. So I think that's ridiculous. So I think there should always be room for asking the most silly questions and doing the most silly things. And disassembling a stupid plastic thing that fits on a toothbrush is probably fits that category quite well. Quite a long time ago, when Piotr was still co-hosting, we talked about the Arduino bootloader and the fact that you could use the single USB link to the Arduino to upload software as well as debug the device using the serial link of the AVR microcontroller. And what I did was take a look at the OptiBoot bootloader. I think it's not the original. To be honest, I couldn't find what the original was, if there is an original, and to be even more honest, I don't actually care what is the original, just wanted to see how it works. So what it is basically a loop receiving serial commands and then writing them to flash and having a watchdog timeout. So if no serial commands or the go serial command or whatever is received, then execute normal program. What I like about the whole Arduino setup is that you can have that you can share one physical link between the host PC and the target device to upload firmware when reset is being pulled low on the target device, or debug the target device when reset is released, so during runtime. So to make that work without a bootloader, what I did here was connect the UART pins on the target device to the ISP pins on the target device. So during reset, when firmware is being uploaded from the host PC to the target device, the UART pins on the target device are tri-stated, so they don't do anything. So you can use the ISP function to program the device. During runtime, I would tri-state the ISP pins, so that's MISO, MOSI, clock, and I would use the UART pins to send and receive data to the host PC. That works fine if you have a device in between the host PC and the target platform that can understand or at least pass at both ISP protocol and UART protocol. What I use as programming dongle is a FTDI UART to USB bridge chip. And they can do both. They can bit bang pins on the target side, or it can act like a USB to UART bridge. So that works very well. I can use a serial terminal to debug stuff, or upload firmware using AVR dude. That's what I use here. And you have a little script that either kills the serial terminal when it needs the UART port to upload, when it needs the serial port on the host PC side to upload software, or it can start the terminal or notify the terminal that it can start again when the upload is done. So that works very well. I'm quite happy with that because it's quite universal as long as you have the same programming dongle as I have, and I know I'll pretty much always have this one for devices that understand it. I made this thing myself. It works quite well. Very simple, very transparent. And I don't need a bootloader on the target device, so this is the most simple thing I could come up with, and it worked very well, so I'm happy with that. And by the way, the breathing problems that I talked about at the start, they are getting a little bit worse, so the training worked very well. It's getting a bit of a problem now, but whatever, we'll see how it goes. Another thing that I did last week was make a video about the Quebec CPU that I made, CPU project, transistor CPU. So basically a 5-minute comparison between the old CPU design where you needed a host PC to act as RAM and ROM, to implement RAM and ROM over a serial link, versus a new model that can run standalone, and it's smaller and nicer and fancier and with a lot of LEDs, and everyone likes LEDs. So that was nice. That's basically finished now. And last but definitely not least, I was looking for a portable soldering iron. Now I had a couple of soldering irons that I tried, portable, and they all suck. I had a battery operated small Weller soldering iron with 4 AA batteries or something. That sucked really hard. I'm never ever going to use that again. And I have a 12 watt Weller soldering iron that sticks straight into the mains that I got from my dad. To be honest, it's also a piece of shit to do very small. Well, it's not suitable for SMD because the tip is much too big. And it's not suitable for anything not SMD because it cannot deliver the heat that you need. So I gave that one away. And instead I got a TS100 soldering iron, which is a thing with a DC-DC converter inside. It runs off 12 to 24 volts, I think. And it has maybe what's called an active tip, so it has the heating element integrated in the tip. So heating element and thermocouple or whatever is in the tip. And that thing is really cool. I'm really happy with that. It tested a little bit at 24 volts when it pulls about 3 amps of current when starting up. It ramps up in about 10 seconds from room temperature to above 300, so that's really good. When it heats up, it pulls 3 amps. When it's doing heavy work, it pulls about 2.5 amps maximum. So you do the math. At 12 volts, it pulls about 1.5 amp maximum at heavy work. And I didn't really test it really well. What I did was get a big copper-clad PCB and put a lot of solder on there and try to heat it up. And when it's actually doing super hard work like that, it's the tip temperature shows 350 degrees on the display. That's a really nice OLED display and a nice actual good software. This software works. It's not a piece of crap. It actually works. It's really nice. The tip temperature shows 350 degrees on display. However, the real tip temperature is 280 degrees. And tip temperature is actually what the display shows during idle. But it simply cannot keep up. But it performs way better than anything I have seen so far, which is not... I use a GBC soldering iron here for the actual work, and that can run circles around this one, but hey, for the price, it's perfect. You can run it off a laptop PSU if you want, or get a separate 24 volts PSU or something like that. Works very well. Super happy with that. So this is getting a bit long already, but I'll talk a little bit about what I'm planning to do in the coming weeks. Maybe find a new home computer or console to play with. I have a few candidates, and for me it's interesting what the video display looks like of the device and what CPU is inside and whether I can find an assembler for that. And how weird it is. I like weird things. So I found the VideoPack the Philips VideoPack G7000 or the Magnavox Odyssey 2, same thing, which has a Intel 8048 inside. And I think there's an assembler for that. It's a weird console wanting to be a home computer. It's a strange thing from 1978, I think. Next candidate is a Radofen 1292 console thing. It's not a Pong console, it's a little bit more advanced. There's actual ROM cartridges that can run games. I'm not sure from which year it is, to be honest. There's a Signetics 2650 inside, and I never did anything with that. I heard from a person who worked with that's a very nice CPU. I don't know exactly what he meant. I think I do, but I'll have to see it for myself. When searching for an assembler for that, I found something that has the interesting and intuitive name of ASXXXX, which is basically a collection of assemblers. And the target platforms, I'll put a link in the show notes for this, but the target platforms or the target CPUs supported by this thing is really bizarre. Everything is supported, like the 6502 and the Z80 and the Signetics and the Fairchild F8 and the 8600 and Intel and Microchip PIC and everything. It's nice if it works. Then another candidate is the original Magnavox Odyssey, and I would love to get one because it's not it doesn't have a CPU inside. It's all discrete electronics. And instead of actual ROM cartridges, it has basically printed circuit board with tracks, so connecting pins of the cartridge connector together to make variations of basically the prefab game inside the console. Now, what I like about this is that I can see literally on the PCB how video signals work, how video generation works. It's all very visible. So I would love to get one, but I think they're pretty not easy to get by. So if anyone has one, please donate it to me ASAP. The last candidate is a Fairchild Channel F game console, which was a pretty early model. Actually, it was a first console with ROM cartridges, with actual ROM cartridges. So that contained an actual program code. And this console has the Fairchild F8 CPU. And I think it's not a single chip CPU. I think it's a CPU spread over different chips. So I think the main CPU doesn't have an address bus, and it uses something like a command protocol using only 5 or 6 bits between different chips, so that may be very interesting. Also, these things are not easy to get, at least not for me, and I don't want to shop on eBay because I never did that basically, so I'm looking at the local Dutch second-hand sites and there are no Fairchild Channel Fs, so oh well. Okay, some other thing I will probably build pretty soon is a driver box that I talked about a little bit earlier. So digital signal comes in, so CMOS signal for example comes in, and you have a number of outputs, different types of outputs. So you have one half bridge output, or one open drain output, or one relay output, or one triac output, or something like that. So that's easy to go from CMOS on one side to whatever you want to do. So if you want to control, I don't know, a mains device, let it switch on and off at 10 Hertz, then input with your function generator 10 Hertz signal and connect it to the relay output, and there you go, or the triac output. I wanted to use that a couple of times already, so I think it's pretty convenient to have it, but involves effort. What I also want to make is sitting on my shelf a little bit long now is a small portable power supply, a lab power supply with actual controls on it. So from someone else I got a DPS 5005 power supply module. These are things that are not too expensive and you have them in different ratings. So I have the 5 amp version, which is way too much for me. I would be happy with 1 amp or even 500 milliamps is fine for me. And basically in goes a DC voltage and out comes a DC voltage which you can control. So you can set constant current mode, constant voltage mode. You can set over voltage, over current protection. It is a nice display. You can read the values and turn it on and off and so on. It's like a really nice, mini, simple lab supply. I'm planning to run it off a 24 volts AC-DC converter, a small thing that you would normally put on a PCB, so everything would fit in a very small box with a mains wire on it and 2 4mm sockets. I tested it a little bit, supplied a load that seems to work okay. I noticed that it had about 1 voltage drop at 24 volts, so if you put in 24 volts you can maximum get 23 volts out, which is absolutely fine, so I think this will be a nice thing. I talked about a retro computer place in the center of the Netherlands in Utrecht earlier, and one of the people there suggested that maybe it would be nice to give a small workshop or talk about how to use an oscilloscope. So I don't know exactly which audience there will be, but I'm interested and I would like to do that. So in the coming weeks or month maybe I'll prepare a little thing with a few slides and maybe some circuits that you can poke a scope at and see what works or what doesn't work, and mention some pitfalls and principles and use cases, and I think it would be very nice. And what I also would like to do, I think the previous couple of episodes I talked about my cartridge adapter for the Commodore 64. Now the project is basically finished. I think it works. What I would like to do now is make a very generic Commodore 64 intro that doesn't have a club or event logo on it. It's not demo-like, but it would actually tell the user using pictures and text something about the machine itself. Because I think it would be fun to make these old computers a little bit more accessible to people who have no experience with these. Because it's a very nice contained platform. You have a video screen and you have buttons and you have a CPU, and you can basically use it like a target platform to learn a bit about programming maybe, or to learn how to use a very small system. And it was a lot of fun because you can see whatever you do. You can write to pixels, you don't have any library, you can access the hardware, and or maybe kids would be interested in learning about home computers if it was a little bit more accessible. Maybe I'm an old fart, but I don't have the feeling that all of this stuff is very accessible. So if you know how to use it, it's all fine. But if you are a complete noob, seeing an old home computer sitting at a basic prompt, then it's not very interesting, maybe. A little bit further down the road is the IF Comp. It's an interactive fiction competition. I would like to enter something in that, something electronic and original. And I think registration starts at July 1st, and the actual event is later, but I talked about it a little bit before. Basically, it's a electronic, interactive, compact cassette tape adventure game. So it's a bit of electronics and a bit of software that looks and feels like a compact cassette. You can put it in a tape player and it would tell you, using speech synthesis or pre-recorded speech, where you are in the game. And you can control it by using the buttons on the cassette player. So yeah, that should be nice. Around that time is also the EMF, Electromagnetic Field Camp in England, and maybe I would like to do something for that as well, something original, thinking an IR distance sensor that you can use instead of a joystick. So what I would like to make maybe is a console playing Pong or some simple game like that, where instead of using a pedal or joystick, you can control your bat by moving closer or further away from the console, and the distance sensor would sense that and actually move the bat accordingly. So you can play against someone else and you can walk towards or walk away from the console to control your bat. It should be nice. I notice every episode I talk about upcoming events and then don't go to those events. So a few of the past events that I did or did not mention and did not go to were the Retro Challenge, which I competed in and ended in April, so there's that. Then there is something new, and I heard about this but never considered it seriously because I'm not that into BASIC, but it's the BASIC 10-liner contest. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And they have different categories to basically having to do with the basic dialect to be used and the maximum line length. And I saw some amazing games and programs being made that way, so that's nice and contained, and it doesn't cost a half a year to do that, so maybe it's nice to enter in that. But the most recent Basic 10-liner contest is just over, and I think a new one starts every year, so we'll see it when we see it. And then I talked full of enthusiasm about the VCFE, that is not the VCF East but VCF Europe in München, which was end of April. I didn't go there, so without came or went, I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything as well for the outline demo party, which was May 10 until May 13. I saw some demos or intros there from the competition, and it's pretty nice, I think. It's mostly Atari oriented, but I'm not really sure. I think you can compete in any game. It would be a nice experience, but for this time I didn't have time, and it was a bit of a maybe another time, not yet. And finally, some upcoming events which may or may not be interesting to you. First of all, there's the Maker Faire in Berlin, which is going on right now, May 26 and 27. So when you hear this, it's probably over, and they have one each year, so maybe next year then. Then there's the HCC Retro Group meeting. Over here in the Netherlands, they have a HCC, that's a Hobby Computer Club, I think. And they have different divisions, so they have a Commodore division and a I don't know what, the Internet of Things division and the Raspberry Pi division and whatever, Atari division maybe, and also a retro division. And I think they're pretty much into obscure computers and also a bit of home build gear. So they have a meeting tomorrow. It's Friday now. They have a meeting tomorrow. It's Saturday, and I'm planning to go there. Just 1 hour or a few hours, look around, see if it's interesting or not, talk with some people, and I'll talk about that next time. Then there's the Indigo indie game event in Utrecht, I think, in the Netherlands, but it is in June 29th. And I registered that and I'm going there. And I'm sure I don't know any of the games displayed there or any of the platforms, but maybe to get some ideas or to see stuff that I never saw before. So it should be interesting. And the IF Comp that I mentioned earlier, once again, registration starts on July 1st. So that was all for now. For more information, links and previous episodes, visit podcast.cba.si. Stay tuned, thanks for listening, and goodbye.